So we begin in 1940, and World War I is over. The Ottomans have been vanquished. There is a massive vacuum in the Middle East and in the Muslim world in general. The Ottomans, who were effectively in control for centuries, are now out of the equation. You have the British, the French, the Italians, who have divided the Middle East between themselves, and you have various protectorates, newly founded nations who are still under the guardianship of the United Nations or of one of the main allies. Within this period of time, they find a new way to identify themselves. If you remember, under the Ottoman system, all Muslims, all Christians, all Jews were grouped under their religious identity, which meant in a nation such as, for example, let's take Palestine, a Christian Arab and an Armenian Arab and a Coptic Arab would be considered one community. And the Muslim Turk and the Muslim Kurd and the Muslim Arab would be considered one community. So when the system is removed, there's a bit of confusion now. The Arabs, mostly the Arabs, I mean all the other nations had the same issue, but mostly the Arabs are looking for an identity. And it was a Christian Arab, amongst the Christian Arab elite in Syria, that a new ideology emerges. You're looking at one of the leading and founding fathers of this movement, 𝗲𝗡𝗏𝗏 here, who studies in Sorbonne, which is an elite French school, and comes back to Syria with new ideas. And of course the French, their idea was fraternity, brotherhood, and nationalism. Nationalism being the key aspect of their revolution. He comes back with this idea that, as Arabs, what unites us is not necessarily our religions, because we have Christians, we have Muslims, we have Jews, we have Druze even. What should unite all of us is our Arabism, our language, our culture, our heritage. Our Arabness is what unites us. And so you find, following the Ottoman Empire, where there was a difference between a Christian Arab community and a Muslim Arab community, now they were united. What unites us now is our Arabness, and the nations we've now founded under the the pan-Arabist umbrella. So this new idea comes up, and it's called the Ba'athi movement. Ba'atha is to rise up or to revive, or renaissance, like a rebirth effectively. So it's like an uprising. It's like a revolution. Not a revolution, it's more for renaissance. Okay, they've risen up again, and they rise up in the name of Arab sentiment, identity, nationality, customs, language, and everything else that goes with it. It's a very powerful movement, because all of the movements we have since then, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Egypt, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Palestine itself at some point, it was in the spirit of Arab nationalism, pan-Arab nationalism. They will take on different names, but effectively they were all under the same umbrella. So 𝗲𝗏𝗏 being one of the founding, you could say, ideologues, brings the idea back. And he works with various other very influential men and women in Syria, but also this spreads across other regions of the Arab world to bring about a new revolution. Right? And so you find people such as Nasser in Egypt, they are students of Aflaq and his ideology. Okay? Gaddafi, all of these nationalists that rise up later on in the 50s, 60s are the students of Aflaq, and ideologically speaking, they are his sons. They looked up to him. So this idea is born, and for the Arab world at the time, it was a novelty. It was a novelty because if you look at the potential of the Arab world, when they unite, they have a single language, although they have different dialects. Unlike the European nations that have different languages, French and English are not the same. German, Italian are the same. They may have the same roots in the Latin languages, but they are not the same. The Arab world can be united by language, especially Fusha Arabiya. They're united. If you look at the entire Arab world and you consider that this entire landmass is united, at least in language, the potential there is immense. It is really immense. Right? So they unite on language, culture, civilization, but also political ambition. They want to be free, they want to be sovereign, they want to be independent. And all these, you could say all of these ideologues going to the Western world and coming back with ideas, imported back. And so 1940 effectively is the beginning of a new stage in Arab development. I don't say Islamic development because it wasn't an Islamic movement. It was as much Islamic as it was Christian, because there were many influential Christian Arabs who were also part of this movement. Yeah. So the Ba'athi ideology is founded. Salah al-Bitar was another, he's a Muslim but a Syrian Muslim. Between the two of them, they basically established the foundations of this movement. It later develops, of course, like any other movement. It doesn't just remain stagnant. It develops and takes on socialist leanings later on. Okay, so you may have somebody who's a Ba'athi and he's in, let's say, Iraq, and there's a Ba'athi in Syria. They have differences. Sometimes they fight one another. You know, Hafiz al-Assad and you have Saddam Hussein. They have the same ideology but different perspective, different madahib basically, different schools of thought. Sometimes they fight one another, sometimes they come together, but the umbrella is the same umbrella. It comes under the same umbrella. I would say of all the movements that the Arab world has ever seen, this has to be one of the most powerful after Islam, because Islam unites the entire Arab world for a long time and turns what used to be a very divided, underdeveloped region into a very, very powerful world empire. They're influential people in society, and they're able to actually rile up the masses. They have a lot of potential when it comes to changing the situation. One of the things I think we should look at when we look at these sorts of histories is, how did they do it? How did they do it? What were the components to why they were successful? And if you look at the Ba'athi movement, although it was not a Muslim Islamic movement, it was very effective. It did not begin with terrorist attacks. It did not begin with, you could say, physical actions. It was ideological. It was ideas. And it did not begin with the masses. It began with the elite. Okay, so this is how movements take shape. They begin and they become powerful. It didn't begin either with individuals having discussions. It was political meetings, political ideologies, political alliances. They began at the top, basically. It was a top-down movement. And by the time they became successful enough and powerful enough, the masses were ready to follow them. Okay. So it wasn't a grassroots movement, it was a top-down movement. The elite, the thinkers, the educated, the powerful, the connected. In other words, 𝗲𝙗 they began that movement. So something for us to think about when we try to, when we have discussions about what would revive the Muslim world today. I am not for the physical option. I think the pen is mightier than the sword. The pen is mightier than the sword. You don't begin with physical altercation, because in history we haven't seen that to be effective. For the most part, it's not been effective. You begin with ideas, thoughts, thinkers, intellectuals, people who can change perspectives and plant seeds, and then the rest follows. Yeah. It was exciting, you know, it was exciting, it was novel, it was new, and new faces were arising, all young faces. The free officers in Egypt, young people. Gaddafi comes in like in his 20s. They're young, they have a lot of energy, they have a lot of promises, a lot of life, and they're speaking boldly, with charisma, and they're dressed very sharp. You had Sadat and Gaddafi are infamous for their dress sense. If you look at their early interviews, they have designer, especially Sadat would order Italian suits tailor fitted for him, shades and the watches, and right. So they had a lot of eccentric figures in that era, and a lot of really. And then Saddam Hussein comes in. So honestly, the entire epoch. Not to praise it, because again, ultimately speaking, it wasn't Islamic, but you have to look at it from the lens of, if I were there, could I judge it the way I judge it today? No, you couldn't. You couldn't. Many of us, our parents who were alive at that time, looked up to these people. Even if you were in West Africa, you looked up to Nasser. Nasser was a major influence. Malcolm X went to Egypt and fell in love with Nasser, right? In terms of his ideology, his movement, his charisma, his thinking. Nasser supported when in America you had the Jim Crow segregation. Nasser sent for the African Americans to come to Egypt to settle there. They said, come to Egypt, study with us. Which is why in that epoch there were many, many black Americans who settled in Egypt. There was a community there. If you speak to the elderly, the elders of they'll tell you, yeah, we spent time in Egypt. That's why they learned Arabic. At the time, there was also the Soviet, there was communist ideology also. There were communists slash freedom fighters slash... so there's a lot of history there, which is why, again, the descendants of those people, we call them Afrocentrics, whatever the term people want to give to denigrate. But there's a connection to Egypt for many reasons, politically speaking, historically speaking, culturally speaking. And when Malcolm goes to Egypt, he talks extensively of that movement, that specific African American movement who settled there. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, when Nasir dies, who was a great supporter of the black movement, liberation movement in America, that's a part of history I think we need to do something about, honestly. It has to be out there. When he dies, Sadat kicks them out, because Sadat severed ties with all the Soviet, you could say, parties, Russia and all their support. So that's when they left Egypt. It's a long history. But again, the point being, it's very easy for us in 2024 to say it was all kufr, it was all just nationalism, 𝗾𝙗𝙗𝙗𝙬, عنصرية, all of that, put in a bin. But you didn't live in that period. You didn't wake up with that hope and seeing this change happening across the Arab world. You didn't see that. So it's very different to judge. It's very difficult to judge today. Brother Hakim, Brother Ahmed.
Yeah, so I'm curious, what was the Western response to this movement as it was taking place? I ask this because, I mean, today, if we see something pick up this much steam, especially at that level, it means that there's usually been a, the powers that be have kind of greenlit it. So I'm wondering what the state of the world was in 1940 and what were some of the competing ideologies that meant that these guys could get as far as they could. And the other thing I'd like to know is why we didn't see as much activity from the Gulf or from Saudi Arabia when it came to Ba'ath and what their perspective was on these guys.
Fascinating questions, fascinating questions.
Welcome to HistoryUn, the world's leading online learning platform specializing in Islamic history. Discover the HistoryUn mobile app and participate in regular live and interactive seminars and tune in directly from your handset from anywhere in the world. Enjoy instant access to a growing catalog of on-demand streaming content exclusive to the platform, accessible from a variety of devices including desktops, tablets, and cell phones. Connect instantly with our global community of history enthusiasts via our private community forum. To find out more about our online history programs and resources, visit our website today at www.historyun.com.